soon after the criminal investigation began in 1993, I think it was maybe early 1994, I was approached by MIT Press asking to publish the user's guide for PGP as an MIT Press book. And I said, well, how about if we also publish a second book with the total source code of PGP, 800 pages or more, in a book, in a font that could be scanned by optical character recognition. And they thought that was a very amusing idea, and so they agreed to it. So we published the source code in a book. And we then applied for a commodities jurisdiction to the State Department, just the way Phil Karn had done. They had granted it for Bruce Schneier's book. Why not grant it for this book? Both of them were books. Well, of course, the State Department knew what would happen if they said yes, because we would do the same thing as Phil Karn. We would then apply for another one for the floppy disk. This was part of our strategy for our criminal defense. I was still under criminal investigation at this time. We were trying to figure out ways that we could use at trial if I was indicted. We were really focused on trying to keep me out of prison at that time, so this seemed to be a pretty good strategy. Now, if they said no, that's also interesting, because if they said no to exporting a book, that would invoke the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, freedom of the press. I mean, it's a book. You should be able to export any book. Well, they were smart enough not to say no, and they were smart enough not to say yes. There was a lot of communications going on between the State Department and NSA. And NSA said, don't say yes. And the State Department were smart enough to also know that they couldn't say no. So they didn't say anything. They didn't issue a ruling. But MIT Press immediately started exporting the book anyway. A couple of years later, after the case was dropped, I started a company, PGP Inc., in 1996. PGP Inc. then published a book with all the source code in it, which by that time was much larger. It was like 5,000 pages. And we used an OCR font, and we had checksums, and we made it so that it really could be scanned. Nobody released our software electronically until the books were out. Our source code never left the building until the books were out. So we waited for the books to be scanned in Europe, which was a massive undertaking. It took a long time. There were many errors because OCR is not so easy to do for C source code. It's easy to do for words, for English and French and other natural languages, because you can use spelling dictionaries to resolve ambiguities, but it's very difficult to do for C source code. So it took 1,000 man-hours to correct all the mistakes from OCR. But finally, the source code was finally published electronically in Europe from scanning the books. We learned from the mistakes that we made of the complexities of scanning C source code. We then published the next version of PGP with far more elaborate software tools to correct the errors. And we developed these special software tools for scanning the source code and correcting the errors. We put that in a separate book, which was bootstrapping. You could scan the first page of the book, which would help you correct the errors by scanning the second page of the book, which then could help you scan the rest of the book, which had this big software tool, which then could be used to scan the 6,500 pages of PGP version 5.5. It was always growing, bigger. And that was scanned in and fixed. The errors were corrected in 30 man-hours, which is a vast improvement. At that point, this was a breakthrough. It now became possible to export unlimited quantities of crypto source code from the United States by publishing it in books. And that blew a hole in the wall that the US government had in export controls. It was the publication of that book that convinced a lot of government policymakers that it was futile to try to stop the spread of software of publishing source code electronically in books. There was no way to stop it. The books were unstoppable. and could be scaled up to larger and larger bodies of software. So that actually went into their decision to just stop trying to regulate the export of strong crypto.